wanted to talk about step one problems that choral directors face. Now, I've been teaching for more than 25 years in the public school, high school, middle school. I've taught other grades as well, but that is where I spent the bulk of my time. And I watch choral directors across the country. Some of them have amazing choral programs, and others are struggling. But one thing that I've noticed is even the choral directors who have amazing choral programs sometimes on the outside have all of the success, but on the inside, it's not the way it appears on the outside. Let me explain what I mean by that. They have great choirs. The choirs sound good, but these teachers give up their entire lives to have a great program. They give up everything. They give up their family, they give up their social life, they give up their health. They're just dedicating their entire life to their choral program. Now, yes, there are things about that that require lots of skills. However, if you start setting your program up for success with step one, then you will not go down that road. And you could still have that amazing choral program, but not in spite of yourself, not in spite of your personal life, your health, your family, your friends, your relationships. We have to create a structure that's going to work. Now, I put that in my book, Build Your Dream Choral Program, 4 Steps to Choral Success. There are 4 steps in this book. And in my Choral Clarity Collective, which is my community online, those 4 steps are divided actually into 8 modules from the 4 steps. What we're going to be talking about is step 1. What step 1 is and why that's so important. So let's talk about step 1. Step 1 is the foundation of your choral program. Now, step 1 is all the stuff that you did not learn in college, all the stuff you did not learn in your choral methods class, all of the things that you are expected to not have to do because your students come in just wanting to be there. Now, if you're going to have a traditional old school choral program from 1974 and you're taking over for another choral director who has had a successful program in 1974, and you had a time machine and you went back to 1974, you could probably get by with the methods that you learned in your choral methods class, although it still would not be the best form of education. What we're talking about now is understanding what it takes to set up your program to be successful each and every year, before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, and after whatever the next thing that comes our way. The invention of the cell phone, the invention of something new that's distracting, whatever it might be, we need to come up with a foundation that is going to set us up for long-term success. Now, I've been teaching, like I said, in the current high school, I'm entering year 28. I've also taught middle school in the district and kindergarten and other things too. But this is year 28 of my choral program. So I was teaching before 9/11. I was teaching before all of the security measures were in place. There was a time when they said, you must keep your doors open for safety reasons. And now they say, you must keep your doors locked for safety reasons. Everything changes. But what doesn't change is the foundation, building the foundation to our choral program. What that core foundation is, what the core foundation is number 1, safety, and number 2, providing all students with an equal opportunity to learn. Safety is the means of figuring out what will keep students emotionally and physically safe in the classroom. And then What do we need to do to provide the tools for each student to have a pathway for success? After we create that pathway for success, then we could start working on the musical goals, the tangible musical goals like vocal technique, music literacy, advanced singing, and then we could focus on the more advanced things like cultivating a community, empowering leaders, empowering the next generation of musicians, getting students to do amazing things that are beyond all expectations. Now, the big issue that I see choral directors doing is they're jumping the gun. They're jumping past the step one to do other things. So, what do I see? All over Facebook, I see choral directors saying things like, can somebody share with me a fun warm up? What's a fun vocal warm up? Well, a fun vocal warm up is not a foundational thing. If you've got your foundation in place, you don't need fun vocal warm ups. Because if students are engaged in what you're doing, you don't have to make things fun. You see, fun is a way to cover up boredom. Fun is like your kids are bored at home, so you take them to an amusement park. And yeah, they have fun. But then they leave the amusement park, they come home, and they're bored again. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get our students to become engaged. We're trying to get them to become active learners. When you're an active learner, things don't need to be fun. You see, have you ever composed or written or done something that you really love to do and you're so entrenched in it, you lost total track of time? You lose total track of time because you're so engaged in your work, whether it's writing, whether it's singing, whether it's composing, playing a sport. You're so engulfed in what you're doing that you don't need it to be fun. You're just doing it. So the question is, how do we get students to be engulfed in what we're doing and in what they're doing so it doesn't have to be fun? As soon as I see a choral director post, I need a fun song. I need a fun vocal warm up. I need a fun icebreaker. I know that they're on the wrong track, that they have not set up their program for sustainable success. If every day you're having to come up with something creative and something new, you know how taxing that is as a teacher? It's so taxing. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what you need to do to set up your program for success. And that's all in step one. So here we go. So step one, if you're looking at my book, Build Your Dream Choral Program, I'm going to just read exactly what step one is, and then we're going to break that down. So where is that in this book? By the way, the book is on Amazon if anybody is interested. So the 4 steps on page 21. Step one, so it's right here. Step one, create a positive, structured learning environment that allows for focused rehearsals and engaged singers. So let's talk about what that means. The first thing is you need to know, big picture, what your goal is as a choral director. What is your goal? Is your goal to have the best choir in the entire universe? Is your goal to have your students love music making? Is your goal to create a community that makes music together? Is your goal to develop high level of music literacy in your choir? What are your goals? So I always tell people in my Choral Clarity Collective, and of course in the book, you need to first come up with a clear vision of what you want your choir to be, what you want your choral program to be. I always think of my program as I teach life, and music and choral music is my vehicle. I want to create an atmosphere where I'm teaching students about life. I'm using the music to instill life lessons. That's my ultimate goal. And some of life lessons are to get really good at singing, right? The better you get at a skill, the more confident you become, And as a result, the more confident you become as a human being. Um, so creating that vision, okay? The next thing I tell people to do is to create a vision of what their ideal choral rehearsal looks like. How do students walk in the room? Where do they sit? How do they sit? How do they stand when they're singing? How do they sit when they're singing? How does class start? What's the look on their face? Where are they looking? All of those kinds of things create a vision of what you want your choral program to look like before we even dive in to safety and um, guidelines and stuff like that. So you've created this beautiful vision of what you want your program to look like. You know what your long-term goal is, and you know what ideally your rehearsal would look like. The next step is to come up with a way to keep your students safe. So there's a few things you need to think about. Number one, you need to create a classroom management plan. That's number one. After you create a classroom management plan, you can't just say, hey kids, here's my classroom management plan. That's not enough. Some people create halfway decent classroom management plans, but they don't do anything with it. They said, and when I speak with them about it, they say, I did. I told the students what my classroom management plan is. That's not teaching classroom management. Teaching classroom management is properly introducing your plan to your students, making it clear they understand why that plan is in place for their benefit. The next thing you have to do is you need to teach them the plan. Introducing and teaching is not the same thing. Think about that. Introducing and teaching is not the same thing. If the physics teacher gets up in front of the class and on day one says, I'm going to teach you about physics. Here are the things that we're going to cover. Let me tell you why physics is helpful to you, why you're going to gain something from that. The teacher did not teach physics. All they did was they talked about why the subject that they're going to learn is beneficial to them. So, when you introduce a classroom management plan, you introduce it, you explain why it's beneficial to them, and then you have to teach it. That's about how do you actually teach the things that are in your plan. After teaching it, how do you positively reinforce what the students are doing? And then how do you redirect and retrain students who are not following those guidelines in the classroom management plan that are there for their benefit and the class's benefit? I hope that that makes sense so far. By the way, you could ask any questions in the chat. You're able to chat, right? You could always put a Y there if you're able to chat. So that's the system once you create the classroom management plan. Once you create it, you have to introduce it, you have to teach it, you have to positively reinforce it, and then you have to redirect it. And all of this has to happen on the first day of rehearsal. The first step of everything is creating the classroom management plan. The second step is preparing for your first day. The third step is delivery on the first day. Okay, that's all part of step one, I should say, but that's the order of things you need to do in your step one. So now I'm going to talk about the beginning of your plan. We talked about creating that goal, your mission. What's your long-term goal? We talked about um, we talked about after what did I say? After creating your goal, oh, your ideal rehearsal. What does your ideal rehearsal look like? Now you need to come up with guidelines. Now, here's the thing. Most people come up with guidelines or rules arbitrarily. somebody told them what guidelines or rules to put down. That's not a way to choose guidelines or rules. What you need to do is you need to focus, number one, on the safety of your class, and number two, on the effectiveness of the learning process as a result. So, what I recommend doing is creating a list of disruptions and distractions, writing a list of all of the things that get in the way of a good rehearsal. And when you list all of them, the goal from there is to create guidelines that address those disruptions and distractions. Create guidelines that that are going to address every disruption and distraction that happens within your classroom. And so again, instead of just saying, "Oh, I heard there's a great guideline," or "Harry Wong came up with a great rule," or "This choir director has a great rule," forget about that. Come up with guidelines that address the disruptions and distractions that you have in your classroom. So let me take a step back for a second. I use the word guidelines instead of rules because rulers make rules. Rulers make rules. And you know what happens when somebody doesn't follow a rule? They get punished. People get punished when they don't follow rules because the ruler makes the rules and people get punished when they don't follow the rules. CEOs create guidelines. They create guidelines. So when you create a guideline and somebody doesn't follow that guideline, you know what you do? You redirect that student. You redirect students who don't follow the guidelines. There's a big difference because the mindset of redirecting a student who doesn't follow the guideline is that you want them to learn how to behave better in the classroom. So I'm a huge fan of using the word guidelines. That affects what you do. You redirect students instead of punishing them. Instead of having rules and consequences, you have guidelines and redirections. So now, let's go back. We're talking about disruptions and distractions. So those are all the things that happen, whether they're intentional or unintentional, they happen in your classroom. So let's talk about the kinds of disruptions and distractions that are there. There's talking, there's calling out, there's touching each other, there's getting out of your seat, sharpening the pencil, going to the bathroom, things like that that happen within your classroom. So your goal is to create guidelines that are going to address all of the disruptions and distractions. But if you do it right, there will only need to be a max of 5. You only need 5 guidelines to address almost all of the disruptions and distractions that happen in your rehearsal. Now, there are going to be things that happen that you won't address, but most of them are going to come from routines, creating procedures and routines. So, for example, the bathroom is not a guideline. You're not going to say, use up one of your 5 guidelines for the bathroom. You're going to use up your guidelines for talking, for touching, for for calling out, for following directions, for cell phones, for those kinds of things. But the bathroom could be a routine. So you set a procedure. So your procedure could be, if you need to use the restroom, raise 2 fingers up. Or if you need to use the restroom, look at the pass. If it's available, you may grab it and leave the room. Or there's a sign-out sheet. One person may leave at a time. There's a red or green card. You could turn the card, red or green. When you leave and come back, you may leave. But the goal is that you don't want class to be disrupted because that's a disruption. So you need to create 5 guidelines that are going to address behavior, and then create routines and procedures for everything else. So what's the procedure for entering the room? What's the procedure for class starting? What's the procedure for sharpening a pencil? All of those things, what are the procedures? So you're practicing, you're coming up with this list of all of the things that are going to keep the students safe, and then in turn, then set them up to be successful learners in the classroom. Now, I want to say one more thing about guidelines. A catch-all guideline is not a successful guideline. If you say something like, be respectful, it is not a clear guideline. Nobody knows what that means until after the fact. Somebody curses, you go, oh, that was not respectful. What you want to do is you want to think about all of the things that respect means to you. Does respect mean waiting your turn to speak? Does respect mean not touching other kids? Does respect mean only speaking when you're given the opportunity to speak? Think about all the things that respect means and create 5 clear guidelines. The ones that I like to use, I always use follow directions the first time they're given. I always use raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you speak. That's if you have a large group, like let's say more than 10 students. You always want students to raise their hand. Too many students just means they call out whenever they feel like it. You don't want that. And then from there, the guidelines are based on the situation. If you have students that are touchy-feely, please keep hands and feet to yourself. If students bring food in, you don't want them to bring food in, you would say the only food or beverage you may bring in is water. If cell phones are an issue, please stow all cell phones before class begins. So those are clear guidelines that address that. So we have our guidelines, we have our procedures. Now we get into class. The students come into class, and hopefully one of your procedures is assigned seating, that the students come in on the first day and they know exactly where to sit. There's a way to do that. Again, I talk about it in my book, and I talk about it in the collective. All the stuff that I'm talking about here, we talk about in great depth, and we help everybody solve their own personal issues that happen in their classroom in the collective. So what we do on the first day is the students come in, they sit in their assigned seats. They're already assigned. They don't sit down in random seats and then I reassign them. That gives you moaning and groaning, and that means that they will, of course, be in charge of the classroom. You've already lost that learning environment from the very first moment. Excuse me. So your first rehearsal, those students need to know where they're sitting before they walk in the room. And there are many ways you could do that. Now, your argument might be, well, and some people might say, yeah, but I don't know what their voice part is. I don't know what, it doesn't matter. Put them in an assigned seat on day one. So they walk into their assigned seat and you start the class. Obviously, there are lots of different things you could do to start the class effectively. Hand them a do now to start, give them a survey, whatever it might be. The first lesson you're going to teach is you're going to teach them about who you are quickly. So if they already know you, you're still going to remind them who you are. I have the same students every year for 4 years in my choir. I still start, introduce myself, how I'd like to be called, how long I've been teaching, what my goals are. That's my mission that I already created. And then I point to the guidelines. And I explain the reason why we have these guidelines is to create a safe environment where every student has an equal opportunity to be successful. So I'm framing the guidelines to help them because that's why they are there. So I make that clear. Now, I introduce all 5 guidelines. Let's say they're right here. The first guideline is follow directions the first time they're given. So I explained the guideline so I introduced the guideline to the students. That's all I did. That does not mean I've taught it. I've just introduced it. So I might say to the students, who could raise their hand and share with the class why that guideline is important? And somebody raises their hand, somebody else calls out. I ignore the person who calls out. I just focus on the person who raised their hand. And I say, thank you for raising your hand. And they give me an answer. And when they share the answer, if it's a good answer, I'm going to say, that's exactly right. Great answer. And if it's not the best answer, I'm going to guide them to find the best answer they could possibly find or come up with. So let's say I say, why should we follow directions the first time they're given? And the student says, because we have to. I'll say, okay, that is true. I am expecting you to do that in this class. But my question is why? Why? How does that benefit you? How does that benefit the class? And so that is the way that I would address that with the students. I would ask them. Now, my second guideline that I just addressed, well, the second guideline is please raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you speak. Now, I want you to notice when I did the first guideline, I already set that second guideline up. So I'm already teaching it. I taught it before we even got there. So my second guideline is please raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you speak. So who could raise their hand and share with the class why this is important? Thank you for raising your hand. Why was that important? And the student might say something like, well, because if somebody calls out, then somebody else can't answer the question. I'd say, yeah, that's true. That's great. And notice how we did that when we went over the first guideline. Thank you so much for raising your hand, and thank you for that. Would anybody else like to raise their hand and share why that's important? And maybe somebody will say, well, that also addresses talking. And if they don't, I can say, well, let me explain to you that also addresses talking, because if you need to raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you speak, that means anytime you're going to speak in this class, you're going to raise your hand. That means that side conversations are not going to happen, because every time you talk, I think you're sharing it with the class. When I speak, I'm sharing my information with the class. Okay, so anyway, I'm showing you the way in which I'm explaining this to the class on the first day. So far, I did not teach following directions the first time they're given. I did begin to teach, raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you speak. I taught it through the guideline. So then I might move on to the third guideline, which is be in your assigned seat before the bell with all of your belongings away and your choir material out. Who could raise their hand and share with the class why that's important? And get somebody, obviously, so we can start on time. Great. Can we all please stand up for a second? Great. Thank you for following directions the first time they're given. I asked you all to stand up, and you stood up and you followed those directions. Thank you so much. You could all sit down. Thank you all for following directions. I appreciate that. That's going to benefit the flow of the rehearsal. You see, if we all follow those directions, if we all follow these guidelines, everybody's going to be set up for success. So there's the introduction, the why we have the guidelines. Then there is the introducing the guidelines. Then it's teaching the guidelines. Then it's positively reinforcing the guidelines. And then we get to redirection. When students are not following the guidelines while I'm teaching it, I just ignore the poor behavior. I wait till I get to the redirections before I address it. When I get to what I'm going to do for the redirections, I explain in that moment. You see, when we were doing this, there were a few students who were acting in this kind of way. That's why we have the behavioral redirections. And the goal is to redirect students. We're not trying to punish you when you make poor decisions or you make the wrong decision, but we are trying to teach you. So that's when I go through the behavioral redirection. Now, that is something I teach in depth in the collective. And again, it's in the book. I don't have time now to go through the whole behavioral direction plan, but let me explain this to you. I don't believe you should be giving up your lunchtime, your prep time, or your after school time to reprimand students. Your goal is to teach them how to behave better in your class because it's to their benefit. So the redirection that you come up with should be easy for you to give and should not contain anger. You shouldn't be angry because if a student doesn't follow the guidelines, they just need to learn. And if that involves a parent or an administrator to help out, that's fine. However, you have to make sure you're consistent. Now, if you want to learn more about that, I suggest you join the collective. It's really inexpensive, and you can be part of a community and ask questions one-on-one, post questions, and learn it, or get the book, Build Your Dream Choral Program. And I've got the link here, so if you're interested, you just go to my YouTube page. But you got a way to redirect behavior. So now, after you've done that, you're not done. You're going to spend the rest of that period, and frankly, the rest of the first week, focusing on the guidelines, focusing on teaching procedures, and focusing on redirecting behavior. Now, the students are not going to know that. They'll know it on day one, but they won't know it toward the end of the first class, and they're not going to know it on day 2, 3, 4, 5. What they're going to do is they're going to be focusing on developing their skills, but you're going to be focusing on your classroom management plan. So what do I mean by that? I've taught the 5 guidelines, I've taught the behavioral redirection, and now I'm starting to teach procedures. Everybody, when I play a chord on the piano, that means everybody stands up. Let's practice that. Bum, everybody stands up. Great job following directions. Now you know from now on when I play this chord on the piano, we all stand up. Okay, so we are going to sing this exercise. Ooh, everybody sing. Ooh, great job following directions. I asked you to sing, you sang. Okay, who could raise their hand and share with the class some of the things that you might want to think about when you're singing that exercise? Breathing from the diaphragm. And you're like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Nobody should say breathing from the diaphragm. That's an involuntary muscle, blah, 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 blah. You talk about maybe the solar plexus and where they should feel their solar plexus pop out. Ha, ha, ha. And you have them all feel it. Put their hands here. Can they feel it? Ha, ha, ha. Could you keep your jaw open? Ha, ha, ha. Thank you for following directions. Thank you for being actively participating. Okay, let's go back. Ooh. And so they all do it. Hopefully the sound is better. They have a released jaw. They're feeling it from here. Great job, everybody. Let's sit back down again. Thank you so much. By the way, everybody, I want to talk about the procedure for standing up and sitting down. When you stand up, we're going to call that level 1. Level 1 is standing. Level 2 is sitting like you're standing because we want to have good alignment when we're singing. And level 3 is where you can sit back any way you want as long as you're not touching other students. Okay, so your hands and feet are to yourself, which, by the way, is the 4th guideline. So I would like to make sure that we understand that. So I'm going to play a chord on the piano. You know to stand up because I played that. Great. Awesome. That's how I start the warm-ups every day. And tomorrow, I'm not going to remind you. I'm just going to play the chord. See, I'm teaching them about tomorrow today. Boom. Stand up. Okay. So let's talk about, we're all standing up. Let's talk about what level 1 looks like. Okay. And you demonstrate. Okay. Everybody, let's go to level 2. Thank you for following directions. You all follow directions. So now I'm teaching level 2. Okay. And now sit back, level 3. Great job, everybody. And now you talk about it, level 1, level 2, level 3, and you discuss that with them. Okay, boom. Awesome. You all remember to stand. That's level 1. Now, do we have good level 1 alignment? Let's go back to singing. You notice how I'm teaching them aspects of singing. I'm getting them engaged on their alignment, about their jaw, their tongue, whatever it is that I'm focused on with them. But in my head, I'm using this as building blocks to establish step 1. Establish the foundation. The foundation where students feel safe, meaning they have their home, they've got their assigned seat, they have directions that they must follow. That means that they all have their own personal space. They all know what they need to do, so they're not nervous about doing the wrong thing because they're being taught what they need to do. And they're all being given the tools to be successful. It doesn't end on day 1. In fact, not only do you remind them on day 2, you read the guidelines again as a reminder, and then you reinforce it. And maybe even day 3, maybe day 4, you say, everybody, just a reminder, here are the 5 guidelines. And the 5th day, just a reminder, here are the 5 guidelines. And you keep reinforcing it, but you might find something slip. Just like in a corporation with guidelines, employees, they get a little lazy, a little lax. So you reinforce the guidelines again. You reteach them. You re-explain why. You take the time to do that. This is step 1. Step 1 is the foundation for a successful program. Now, what happens when your students are successfully in a step 1 situation? They start to become more engaged in the rehearsal, which means they retain more. When they retain more, they buy in more because they feel more successful. As they feel more successful, your program starts to flourish and your students start to want to do more. And you don't have to do so much, because that's the long-term goal, is that as they do more, you do less. I don't have to talk about guidelines every day of the year. I don't even have to reinforce guidelines because they're being reinforced naturally in my program because it's part of the culture. Step 1 is ingrained. And when it gets a little murky, we tweak it. We tweak it. And that's all we need to do from time to time, tweak it. So step 1 is the fundamental key to building your program. I highly recommend that rather than jumping to icebreakers on day 1 and name games, or doing some fun exercise, or getting them singing right away so they hear what a beautiful sound they have, that you focus your energy on classroom management, on step 1, so your students are set up for long-term success, so the students are set up to feel safe, so the students are set up to have a positive learning environment where they have the opportunity to thrive long term. If this information is helpful to you and you would like to learn more, I highly recommend you consider joining the Choral Clarity Collective. It is a community off of Facebook. It's a private community where I give you content like this, but in course form, on demand. And I coach you through live Q&A, through posts, through 24/7 that you could ask me questions, get responses from me, whether it's a written response or a video response. And I'm there to guide you every step of the way, not just now. This is not a one-shot deal, because when you go to a summer workshop, which is kind of like this, there's somebody up there, they're talking, you get a lot of information, but you can only synthesize the first thing. What I do is I show people how to prepare properly, then how to work their plan on the first day. Then we discuss their plan on the first day after it happened, and how to tweak it for day 2, how to tweak it for day 3, how to change a guideline when it's necessary. We do that. And then after teachers in my program start to feel more successful, then we start moving on to vocal technique, matching pitch, and then we move on beyond that into more advanced things. So I hope this was a helpful step one understanding of what you need to do to set up your choral program for success. I don't care how good your group is. If you don't have this set up for success, you are working way too hard in your classroom. Once your students are bought in, based on creating the right environment, you just teach. And you could love teaching and engaging your students because they will be enriched without fun warm ups. Thank you all for staying. And if you're interested, check out my book, Build Your Dream Choral Program, which is available for free in my Choral Clarity Collective or for sale on Amazon for $40 or $50. We've been selling them uh, so quickly lately. It's unbelievable. Thank you all so much, and I will hopefully see you inside the collective.